Hello there, welcome to HFY Quantum Pro. Here, helping one another makes the universe smarter. So, what we are waiting for? Let's begin our story.
Nobody ever noticed Rita Ansari until something broke. She had worked cargo on Driftwell Station for 3 years, hauling crates, checking manifests, and stacking freight pods in the lower bays where the air smelled like engine grease and recycled dust. She was small for a human, with calloused hands and dark hair tied back in a messy braid. She did not complain. She did not stand out. She was just another pair of hands on a station that housed 40,000 beings from dozens of species. Driftwell orbited a blue gas giant at the edge of a busy trade lane. It was old but functional, a place where ships refueled, traders haggled, and species that would never visit each other's homeworlds crossed paths in narrow corridors. Every surface on the station glowed with screens. Navigation screens on the walls. Personal screens on every wrist. Screens embedded in clothing, in furniture, in the handles of tools. The station ran on screens the way a body runs on blood. The Finn were the most dependent. They were tall insectoids with 4 arms and nervous dispositions, and they used neural link screens to regulate their emotions. Without the screens feeding them calming signals, a Finn could spiral into panic within minutes. Ryda's shift partner was a Finn named Losk. He was decent enough, but he had a habit of looking at Ryda like she was some kind of museum exhibit. "You are writing again," Losk said that evening, watching Ryda check off items on a piece of paper with a pencil. "Counting crates," Ryda said. "Your screen can count them. My hand can count them too." Losk made the clicking sound that Finn used to express confusion mixed with pity. Ryda ignored it. She had heard that sound 100 times from a dozen species. Humans were considered mid-tier in the galactic rankings. Not stupid, but not advanced either. And Ryda, with her paper and pencil, was considered primitive even by human standards. She finished her shift and walked back to her quarters through the station's main artery, a wide corridor lined with market stalls and food vendors. Droovy traders floated past her, their squid-like bodies wrapped in translation screens that converted every language in real time. A group of Garathi lumbered by, their stone-gray skin barely fitting through the corridor. Garathi had poor eyesight and relied on screen overlays to see clearly. Without those overlays, they were nearly blind. Ryda reached her small room, dropped on her bunk, and pulled up her personal screen to call her brother Denial back on Earth. The connection was bad. His face kept freezing mid-sentence. "How is Nanny?" Ryda asked. "She is good. She made rice, pudding today, and said to tell you that you are too thin." Ryda smiled. "Tell her I will eat more. She will not believe me." The screen flickered. Denial's voice cut in and out. Then the screen went black. Ryda tapped it. Nothing. She looked up and saw that the light panel on her ceiling had switched to dim red. Emergency lighting. She stepped into the corridor and the world had changed. Every screen on Driftwell Station was dead. The walls were dark. The floor markers were gone. The constant hum of data streaming through the station's network had stopped, leaving a silence so deep it felt physical. And in that silence, the screaming started. Ryda walked toward the main corridor and found chaos. Finn were on the floor, curled into tight balls. Their 4 arms wrapped around themselves as anxiety overwhelmed them without their regulators. Droovy traders bumped into walls and each other, blind without translation overlays and unable to read a single sign. They called out in their own language, but nobody could understand them. Garathi stood frozen in the middle of walkways like gray statues. Unable to see well enough to move, the young Finn stumbled past Ryda, his eyes wild. "The screens," he gasped. "The screens are gone. What do we do? What do we do?" Ryda stood still. She breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth. She felt the fear, cold and sharp in her chest, but she did not let it move her feet. She had felt fear before. She had felt it during monsoon floods when the river rose over its banks and her grandmother grabbed her hand and pulled her to high ground in the dark without a single light to guide them. Fear was not new. Fear without a screen was not new either. She reached in her cargo vest and pulled out her notebook, her pencil, and the small flashlight she always carried because she did not trust station lighting in the lower bays. She clicked the flashlight on. A small beam of yellow light cut through the red-tinted darkness. A dozen alien eyes turned toward her. They looked at her like she was holding a star in her hand. Rita looked down the dark corridor, then down at her notebook. She flipped to a blank page and started walking. Nobody had ever noticed Rita Ansari until something broke. Now everything was broken, and she was the only one still moving. The smell told her where she was before anything else did. Rita had learned Driftwell Station the way her grandmother had learned the village back home. Not by maps or markers, but by senses. The lower cargo bays smelled like machine oil and cold metal. The food market carried the sharp sweetness of droovy spice paste. The recycling corridors had a dry, papery smell. The water distribution hub, which was where she needed to go first, smelled like wet stone and chlorine. She followed her nose through the dark, her flashlight cutting a narrow path ahead. Behind her, she could hear distant shouting, thumping, and the high-pitched keening of Finn in distress. The station sounded like a wounded animal. She reached the market bay first. Inside, she found a cluster of droovy traders pressed against a wall, their soft bodies trembling. Without their translation screens, they could not read the signs, could not understand the announcements, could not even ask for help in a language anyone nearby would recognize. Their large, wet eyes tracked Rita's flashlight with desperation. Rita stopped in front of them. She held up one hand, palm open, the universal gesture for peace that most species understood even without translation. Then she spoke in broken droovy trade speak, the rough pigeon language she had picked up from 3 years of hauling their cargo. "Safe," she said in droovy. "I help. Water. Cool me." The largest droovy, an older trader with faded blue skin, stared at her. His tentacles curled and uncurled. Then he repeated her words back to the others, and slowly they began to move toward her. Rita led them through corridors she knew by feel. She counted steps between junctions. She touched the walls for the familiar bumps of pipe clusters that marked intersections. At one point, the group reached a split in the corridor and Rita paused, closed her eyes, and listened. The faint rush of water through pipes came from the left. She turned left. The water distribution hub was designed to be operated by automated systems. Nobody had touched the manual valves in years. Rita found them behind a panel that she pried open with a cargo hook from her vest. The valves were stiff and coated in dust, but they were mechanical. They did not need a screen. She turned them by hand, grunting with the effort, until clean water began flowing into the collection basins. The droovy drank. Some of them made soft clicking sounds of gratitude. The old trader touched Rita's shoulder gently with one tentacle, a gesture of deep thanks in droovy culture. Rita nodded and moved on. She found Losk 2 corridors away from the engineering level. He was pressed into a corner, his 4 arms locked around his torso, his mandibles chattering rapidly. Without the neural screen that regulated his emotional chemistry, his brain was flooding him with raw, unfiltered anxiety. He was shaking so hard that his chitin plates rattled. Rita sat down next to him. She did not touch him. She did not tell him to calm down. She knew from experience that telling a panicking person to calm down was the most useless sentence in any language. Instead, she talked. "When I was a girl," she said quietly, "we had a tin roof on our house. When a monsoon came, the rain hit that roof so hard it sounded like 1,000 drums. My grandmother would sit with me, and we would count the sounds. She said if you count the drops, the storm cannot scare you because you have given your mind a job." Lost chattering slowed slightly. "The power went out every monsoon season," Rita continued. "No lights, no screens, no fans, just dark and rain and the sound of the river getting closer. My grandmother would tell stories. She would describe things so clearly that I could see them with my ears." Lost's arms loosened slightly around his body. One of his secondary hands reached out and rested on the floor near Rita's knee. "How?" he said, his voice thin and strained. "Are you not afraid?" "I am afraid," Rita said simply. "But where I come from, fear is just weather. It comes and it passes. You do not need a machine to make it stop. You just need to breathe through it." Losk looked at her. Without his screen overlay, his compound eyes were raw and unfocused, but she could see something shifting in them. Not calm exactly, but the beginning of calm. The first crack of light through a closed door. "Can you stand?" she asked. "I think so." "Good. Because something is very wrong with this station, and I need someone with 4 hands to help me fix it." Losk stood. He was unsteady, and his mandibles still clicked nervously, but he was upright. He looked at Ryda's flashlight, her notebook, her pencil. Tools so primitive that his species had abandoned them 1,000 years ago. "You are strange," he said. "I have been told." They started walking toward engineering. Above them, deep in the station's core, a low, grinding sound echoed through the walls. Then the emergency alarms began to scream. Not the gentle chimes of a system notification, but the raw, mechanical wail of an old siren that ran on nothing but air and vibration. The blackout was not a glitch. Something was eating the station alive from the inside. Ryda picked up her pace, her flashlight bobbing in the dark. Losk followed, his 4 arms swinging, his fear still there, but no longer in charge. Behind them, in the market bay, a Druvi trader picked up a piece of scrap metal and scratched a mark on the wall next to the water valve Ryda had opened. A marker, a sign that did not need a screen to read. The old ways were waking up. The engineering level was the heart of Driftwell Station, and like every heart in trouble, it was making terrible sounds. Ryda heard it before she saw it. A deep, rhythmic groan from behind thick walls, like something enormous was breathing in a way it should not be. The floor vibrated under her boots. Losk's antennae flattened against his head. They pushed through a heavy manual door that took both of them to open and stepped into the main engineering bay. It was a vast room filled with consoles, power conduits, and monitoring equipment, all of it dead. Emergency strips along the floor cast a weak red glow over everything. In the middle of the room stood Chief Engineer Ball. He was Garathi. 7 feet tall, 400 pounds of dense muscle and stone-textured skin. His species was known for being unshakable, steady as mountains. But right now, Ball stood in front of his dead console, with his thick fingers hovering over controls he could not see. Without his screen overlay, his weak Garathi eyes could only make out blurry shapes. He was an expert engineer trapped inside a body that could not read its own instruments. "Ball," Ryda said, stepping forward. The Garathi turned his head toward her voice. "The human from Cargo," he said. His voice was deep and slow, like rocks grinding together. "You can see in this dark?" "Well enough," Ryda said. "What happened to the station?" Ball exhaled heavily. "I do not know. I cannot read anything. The consoles are dead. My overlay is dead. I am standing in my own engineering bay, and I am as useful as a stone." "Stones are useful," Ryda said. "I need your brain, not your eyes. Tell me about the power systems. Everything you know. I will write it down." Ball was quiet for a moment. Ryda could feel him struggling with something. Not pride exactly, but the disorientation of being asked to remember things he had not accessed without a screen in decades. His knowledge was in his head, but had been filed away behind layers of digital shortcuts for so long that pulling it out manually felt like digging through packed earth. "Start simple," Ryda said gently. "Where does the station get its power?" "The main core," Ball said slowly. "Fusion reactor, level 12. It feeds into 6 primary distribution lines. Each line powers a section of the station." Ryda wrote this down. "What controls the distribution?" "The signal relay. It sits between the core and the distribution lines. Every command to the power grid passes through it." "Where's the relay?" "Deep maintenance tunnels. Below level 12. Those tunnels have not been accessed manually in 15 years. Everything down there is automated." Ryda kept writing. She asked more questions. What were the safety protocols? What would cause all screens to die at once? What could drain power from the core? Ball answered piece by piece. Some answers came quickly, pulled from deep experience. Others came slowly, dragged out from under years of digital dependency. Ryda was patient. She asked follow-up questions when his answers were unclear. She drew diagrams when words were not enough. After 20 minutes, she had 3 pages of notes and a rough hand-drawn map of the station's power grid. "Here," she said, holding the map up and describing it to Ball since he could not see the details. "The core feeds the relay. The relay feeds the grid. If something is sitting on the relay, pulling power from the core before it reaches the grid, that would explain everything. The screens did not die because of a software fault. They died because something is drinking the station's power. Ball was silent for a long moment. That is a sound theory, he said. But to confirm it, someone would need to go down to the relay physically. Those tunnels are not designed for easy access. No lights. No navigations. No communication once you are deep enough. I know, Rita said. You would need to go without any technology. I know that too. Losk stepped forward. I'm going with her. Ball turned his blurry gaze toward the fan. You are still shaking. Yes, Losk said, but I'm standing. That is enough. Ball gave them what verbal directions he could, describing landmarks in the tunnels from old memory. A rusted ladder after the first junction. A flooded section near the coolant overflow. A narrow squeeze point where the walls closed in. Rita sketched it all onto her map. As she worked, she noticed movement at the edges of the engineering bay. Other beings had gathered. A pair of young Druvi, a Finn maintenance worker, a Garathi apprentice. They watched Rita draw on paper with a pencil, and their faces carried an expression she had seen on children watching fire for the first time. Not understanding. Not yet, but the beginning of it. The young Druvi edged closer and pointed at Rita's notebook with a tentacle. What is that? He asked in halting common speak. Rita looked at her notebook. Pages filled with handwriting, diagrams, arrows, and notes. Information stored without a single watt of electricity. Knowledge that could survive any blackout, any signal death, any system failure. It is a screen that never dies, she said. She tucked the notebook in her vest, clicked her flashlight, and looked at Losk. He nodded, his mandibles set tight. They walked toward the maintenance tunnel entrance, a heavy metal hatch in the floor that nobody had opened by hand in 15 years. Rita grabbed the manual release lever and pulled. It groaned and resisted, then gave way with a sharp clang that a gust of cold, stale air rose from the darkness below. Rita looked down into it, then looked back at the room full of beings who had forgotten how to function without a glowing screen. Then she climbed down into the dark. 3 rungs down the ladder, Rita's flashlight caught something moving in the dark below, and she froze it. It was just condensation dripping from a pipe. A fat drop of water falling through her beam of light, catching it like a tiny falling star. She exhaled, loosened her grip on the ladder, and kept climbing down. The maintenance tunnels were nothing like the rest of Driftwell. Up above, the station was clean lines and smooth surfaces. Down here it was raw. Exposed pipes ran along low ceilings. Graded floors showed dark voids beneath. The walls were metal plates bolted together with rivets the size of her thumb. Everything was old, built in the station's first generation when engineers still expected people to walk these paths regularly. That was decades ago. Now the tunnels belonged to automated systems and silence. Losk dropped down behind her. His 4 arms gripped the ladder with natural ease, but his antennae were pressed flat and his breathing was fast. It smells wrong down here, he said. It smells old, Rita said. There is a difference. She pulled out her notebook and checked the map she had drawn from Ball's directions. First landmark was a rusted ladder at the first junction, which they had already passed. Next was a flooded section near the coolant overflow. After that, a narrow squeeze, then the relay chamber. She pulled a stick of chalk from her vest pocket and drew a small arrow on the wall pointing back toward the ladder. Then she started walking. The tunnels were a maze. Without digital navigation, they would have been impossible for most station residents. But Rita did not navigate like most station residents. She counted her steps. She listened to the pitch of air moving through vents to gauge the size of spaces ahead. She touched pipes to feel which ones carried heat and which carried cold, using that to orient herself relative to the power core above. Losk watched all of this with something between admiration and confusion. Where did you learn this? He asked. My grandmother, Rita said, marking another chalk arrow at a junction. She could walk from our village to the next town in complete darkness. She knew every tree, every ditch, every stone in the road by feel. But you have technology on Earth. Screens. Networks. We do. and they fail. Monsoons knock out power for days. Earthquakes break communication lines. Floods wash away roads and sell towers together. Every generation of humans learns, sometimes the hard way, that machines are tools, not replacements for knowing how to survive. Losk was quiet for a while. Then he said, "The Fen stopped teaching manual skills 3 generations ago. We decided it was inefficient. Why learn to do something a machine does better? And now I am following a human through a dark tunnel because I cannot function without a machine telling me how to feel." "You are functioning right now," Rita said. "You are scared and you are walking anyway. That is functioning." They reached the flooded section. Knee-deep coolant covered the tunnel floor, gray-green and slightly warm. Rita stepped in first, feeling the floor beneath with careful steps. The footing was slippery. Twice, her boots lost grip on something beneath the surface, and she caught herself against the wall. Behind her, Losk waded through with his lower arms touching the walls for balance and his upper arms held high to keep dry. His species was not built for water. His chitin absorbed moisture and became heavy. By the time they reached the other side, he was visibly weighed down. "You all right?" Rita asked. "Uncomfortable," Losk said. "Not dead." "Good enough." The narrow squeeze came next. The walls closed in until the tunnel was barely wide enough for Rita to pass sideways. For Losk, with his wider frame and 4 arms, it was a tight fit. He folded his secondary arms flat against his body and pushed through, chitin scraping against metal with a sound that set Rita's teeth on edge. Then they were through, and the tunnel opened into a larger space. Rita's flashlight swept across the relay chamber. It was circular, roughly 20 feet across, with thick power conduits running from the ceiling into a central housing unit. This was the signal relay, the junction point between the station's power core and its entire distribution grid. And attached to the relay, wrapped around it like a vine around a tree, was something that did not belong. That IT was a probe. Ancient, alien, and covered in a crust of mineral deposits that suggested it had been drifting through space for centuries, maybe longer. It was roughly the size of a large dog, with tendrils of dark metal that had burrowed into the relay's conduits. A faint pulse of light moved through its surface, slow and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. "What is that?" Losk whispered. Rita stepped closer and studied it. The probe was not attacking the station. It was feeding. Its tendrils were drawing power from the core through the relay, pulling energy to fuel whatever ancient signal it was designed to broadcast. A distress beacon, she guessed. Some long-dead civilization's last call for help, designed to latch onto the nearest power source and scream into the void until someone answered. That IT was not evil. It was just desperate. Even dead civilizations could be desperate, but it was killing Driftwell Station. Ball had said life support would fail within 18 hours. They were already hours in. She could feel the air growing slightly thinner, slightly warmer. She traced the probe's tendrils to where they connected to 3 main power conduits. Thick cables, each one carrying enough current to kill her instantly if she was careless. To free the relay, she needed to cut these 3 conduits in the right sequence. Wrong order, and a sudden shift in power flow could overload the core. There were no instructions. No manual. No screen to simulate the options. Rita knelt on the floor, opened her notebook, and began to think. She touched each conduit gently, feeling the vibration of current through the insulation. One hummed high and fast. One hummed low and steady. One barely hummed at all. She wrote down what she felt. She drew the connections. She used basic logic, the kind her grandmother used when deciding which irrigation channel to open first so the fields did not flood. "I think I have the sequence," she said. Losk looked at her notebook. He could not read human writing, but he could see the diagrams. Lines, arrows, numbers. A plan built from touch and thought and pencil lead. "You figured this out by hand," he said. "Hands are what I have," Rita said. She pulled her cargo hook from her vest, tested its edge against her thumb, and positioned herself at the first conduit. The probe pulsed. The station groaned above them. Rita breathed in, breathed out, and raised the hook. She cut the first conduit and the station screamed. Not a mechanical sound. Not an alarm. The entire structure of Driftwell shifted, a deep metallic shudder that ran through the floor and up through Ryda's legs into her spine. The lights in the relay chamber, what little emergency glow remained, flickered and dimmed further. The ancient probe pulsed faster, its heartbeat light quickening as if it felt its food supply being threatened. Ryda held still. She watched. She listened. The hum of the remaining 2 conduits changed pitch slightly, redistributing the load. That was expected. If the station was going to blow, it would have happened in the first 3 seconds. She counted to 10. The shuddering stopped. The air settled. 1 down, she said. Losk was pressed against the far wall, his compound eyes wide. That did not sound good. It sounded exactly right, Ryda said. She checked her notebook, tracing her finger along the diagram she had drawn. The second conduit was the low, steady hum, the one carrying the base load. She moved to it and positioned her cargo hook. This cut needed to be clean. The first conduit had been the lightest carrier. This one held more power. If she nicked it instead of severing it, a partial break could arc, and the resulting spark in a chamber full of old metal and coolant residue was not something she wanted to think about. She lined up the hook, breathed in. Cut! The conduit split with a sharp snap and a brief flash of white light. The probe's pulse stuttered. Its tendrils twitched. The low hum died, and the chamber fell into a deeper silence, leaving only the thin, barely there vibration of the third and final conduit. One more, Ryda said. She wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. Her fingers were shaking slightly. Not from fear this time. From the effort of staying precise when everything in her body wanted to rush. She moved to the third conduit. It was the weakest, barely humming, but it was also the one buried deepest in the probe's grip. The ancient machine's tendrils had wrapped around it tightly, fused to the insulation over what might have been years of slow attachment. She would need to pry the tendrils loose before she could cut. She wedged her cargo hook under the first tendril and pulled. It resisted. She pulled harder. The tendril cracked and released, leaving a dark smear on the conduit casing. Then the probe fought back. Not intelligently. Not with purpose. It was a machine running ancient code, and that code said to hold on to power at any cost. The probe discharged a burst of stored energy through its remaining connection. The shock traveled through the conduit, through the metal floor, and into Ryda. She was thrown backward. Her flashlight flew from her hand, hit the wall, and shattered. Total darkness swallowed the chamber. Ryda lay on her back, gasping. Her hands burned. Her right arm was numb from the elbow down. She could smell scorched fabric where the current had passed through her gloves. Ryda. Losk's voice came from somewhere to her left, high and panicked. I'm alive, she said. Her voice sounded far away, even to herself. I cannot see. I cannot see anything. Neither can I. Losk, listen to me. Stop. Breathe. She heard his rapid clicking slow down by a fraction. You have better hearing than me, Ryda said. Much better. I need you to use it. Close your eyes. It does not matter that it is dark. Close them anyway. Focus on what you hear. Silence. Then Losk spoke, his voice steadier. I hear the conduit. The last one. It is thin, but it is still vibrating. It is to my right. About 4 body lengths from me. Good. What else? I hear you breathing. You're about 2 body lengths from me, on the floor. And I hear the probe. Its pulse is weaker now. Irregular. It is dying, Ryda said. We cut 2 of its 3 feeds. It is running on scraps. But it will keep draining the station until we cut the last one. Losk, I need you to guide me. She got her feet. Her right hand could barely grip. She shifted the cargo hook to her left hand. Walk toward my voice, Losk said. Slowly. There is debris on the floor near you. She walked. He directed her, step by step, using sound to map the space. 3 steps forward. 1 step left. Stop. There's a pipe on the floor. Step over it. 2 more steps. You are close, Losk said. Reach forward. The conduit should be at waist height. Ryda reached out with her burned right hand. Her fingers found the conduit. She could feel the probe's tendrils still wrapped around it, and beneath that, the faint vibration of the last thread of stolen power. She positioned the cargo hook by touch. She could not see. She could not feel properly with her damaged hand. She had a Finn guiding her by sound in a pitch-black chamber at the bottom of a space station that was slowly suffocating. Her grandmother's voice came to her, clear as a bell in the dark. When you cannot see the path, feel for it. When you cannot feel it, listen. When you cannot listen, trust your hands. Your hands know what to do. Right a cut. The tendril snapped. The conduit severed, and the probe went silent. Its pulsing light died. Its tendrils went limp, falling away from the relay like dead branches. The parasitic signal that had been strangling Driftwell Station stopped. For a moment, there was nothing. Pura silence. Pure dark. Then, far above them, deep in the station's core, the fusion reactor caught its breath. Power began to flow through clean conduits again. Emergency systems that had been starving for hours received their first full meal of energy. A single emergency light in the relay chamber buzzed and flickered on, casting a weak yellow glow. Ryder saw Losk standing 3 feet away, all 4 arms extended toward her, his compound eyes reflecting the light. He had been ready to catch her if she fell. "It is done," she said. Her legs gave out. Losk caught her with 2 arms and held her upright with a gentleness she had not known his species possessed. "I will carry you back," he said. "I can walk. Your hands are burned, your legs are shaking, and you just saved 40,000 people with a pencil and a piece of metal. Let someone carry you." Ryder did not argue. Losk lifted her and began walking back through the tunnel, following the chalk arrows she had left on the walls. Small white marks on dark metal, leading the way home. Behind them, the dead probe sat in the dark, its ancient call for help finally silenced, answered not by the civilization it was meant for, but by a woman with a notebook and hands that knew how to work without being told. 12 hours after the screens came back, Ryder still had not slept. She sat on the edge of a medical bed in the station's clinic while a Druvi medic wrapped her hands in gel bandages that smelled like mint and something chemical she could not name. The burns were not deep, but they covered both palms and most of her fingers. The medic told her the nerve damage was minor and would heal within a week. Ryder nodded and said thank you in Druvi, which made the medic pause and blink all 3 of its eyes before continuing. Lost sat on a bench across from her, his chitin still damp from the coolant tunnels. He had refused treatment for himself until Ryder was taken care of first. A Finn putting someone else ahead of his own anxiety was, Ryder had learned, almost unheard of. The station was recovering. Screens glowed on walls again. Translation overlays were back online. Navigation markers lit the corridors in their usual blue-white patterns. The automated systems hummed along as if nothing had happened. From the surface, Driftwell looked the same as it had before, but underneath, something had shifted. Ryder noticed it first in small things. A pair of Finn maintenance workers walking past the clinic were talking to each other without checking their screens. Actually talking, using their voices, looking at each other's faces. One of them was gesturing with all 4 arms to describe something, and the other was clicking in what sounded like genuine laughter, in the corridor outside. A Garathi was feeling along the wall with one hand as he walked, touching the pipes and rivets. His screen overlay was active and working, but he was also paying attention to the physical world around him as if noticing it for the first time. Near the water distribution hub, someone had installed a small hand-painted sign next to the manual valve that Ryder had opened. The sign showed a simple picture of a valve handle with an arrow indicating which way to turn it. No screen, no power required, just paint on metal. Losk saw Ryder looking at these changes and said, "You broke something in us last night. Something that needed breaking." Before Ryder could answer, a tall figure appeared in the clinic doorway. Station Commander Fall. He was Druvi, one of the eldest on the station, with deep blue skin that had faded to gray at the edges of his tentacles. He carried himself with the careful dignity of someone who had spent a lifetime making decisions for others. He approached Ryder's bed and stood in silence for a moment. Then he spoke in slow, precise, common speak. "I have received formal inquiries from the Fen High Council, the Druvi Trade Authority, and the Garathi Engineering Guild. They all asked the same question. They want to know what humans call the ability to function when technology fails." Ryder thought about it. She almost said resilience, or adaptability, or survival instinct. But those were big words for a simple idea. We call it common sense, she said. Fall's tentacles curled slightly, the droovy expression for trying to understand something unfamiliar. Common sense. Is this a discipline? A school of training? No. It is just the basic ability to look at a situation, think about it with your own brain, and do something useful without waiting for a machine to tell you how. On Earth, we have a joke about it. What joke? We say common sense is not that common. Fall considered this. Among the galactic species, it appears to be nearly extinct. We have spent generations making our technology so reliable that we forgot to keep ourselves reliable. Last night proved the cost of that. He paused. The councils and guilds wished to know if Earth would be willing to teach these skills. Rida laughed. She could not help it. The idea of Earth, messy and chaotic Earth, with its floods and power outages and crumbling infrastructure, being asked to teach the galaxy anything was the funniest thing she had heard in years. I will pass the message along, she said. Fall nodded and left. Losk looked at Rida. You laughed at a station commander. He will survive. Losk clicked his mandibles. It was the Finn sound for amusement, and Rida realized it was the first time she had ever heard him make it without a screen regulating his emotions. It was rougher than the screen-smooth version, more real. Later that evening, when the clinic finally released her, Rida walked back to her quarters through the main corridor. It was busy again, full of traders and workers and travelers going about their routines. But people noticed her now. A Garathi dockworker stepped aside to let her pass and dipped his head. A Druvi merchant reached out a tentacle and briefly touched her shoulder as she walked by, the gesture of deep thanks she had received before. A group of young Finn watched her pass with open curiosity, their antennae raised high. Rida did not stop. She was tired, her hands hurt, and she wanted to lie down in her small room and close her eyes. She reached her quarters, sat on her bunk, and pulled out her personal screen. She called Denial. His face appeared, clear this time, the connection strong. He was sitting in their grandmother's kitchen. She could see the tin roof through the window behind him. You look terrible, Denial said. Rough shift, Rida said. Are you okay? She looked at her bandaged hands. She thought about the dark tunnel, the dead probe, the sound of Losk's voice guiding her through blackness, the chalk arrows on the walls, the pencil marks in her notebook that had mapped a path to saving 40,000 lives. I am fine, she said. They talked for a few minutes about small things. Their grandmother's health, the weather back home, whether the mangoes would be good this season, normal things, Earth things, the kind of things that did not need a screen to matter. After the call, Rida opened her notebook to a fresh page. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she wrote the date and a single line beneath it. Day 1 of teaching the galaxy how to survive. She was about to close the notebook when someone knocked on her door. She opened it and found Losk standing in the corridor. He was holding something in his upper right hand. A blank notebook. Simple, paper, bound with a plain cover. He must have found it in one of the human supply shops on the market level. I do not know how to use this, he said. Teach me. Rida looked at him. The tall Finn with his 4 arms and his clicking mandibles and his compound eyes that still carried the shadow of a fear he was learning to carry on his own. He was asking a human to teach him the most basic skill in the universe. How to put a thought on a page without a machine between the thought and the page. She stepped aside and let him in. Sit down, she said. We will start with your name. Losk sat. He held the pencil awkwardly in one of his smaller hands. Rida guided his grip gently, her bandaged fingers over his chitin ones. And on a space station 40,000 light years from a tin-roofed house in a village where the monsoons still knock the power out every year, a Finn learned to write his name on paper, taught by a human whose hands knew things that no screen could hold.